say if you have cell phones, please either turn them off or put them on vibrate, as Don has suggested. This evening, we are privileged to have the members of the St. Louis chapter of Battle of the Bulge, World War II. And I'm going to turn the program over to them right away. They're anxious to tell us a lot about history. I thank everyone for coming, and we'll try to save some of our questions for a little bit later. Okay, Harold Mueller, I'll turn it over to you, and I'll let you introduce them.
I want to thank Becky for inviting us to give our presentation. We go around to schools and many organizations like this to let the younger people know more about what the sacrifices were made for the freedom that we all enjoy today. So keep that in mind. And that's why this war and battle actually took care of us all. This is actually Belgium here, this little area. Is that, can everybody hear me?
No.
No? Good.
We'll get you a microphone if you like, Harold. It's right behind us. How's that?
Got it back?
That turned on.
On now?
Whoa,
Yeah.
there it is. Hey.
I'll holler in.
Good, that's all right.
Okay, like I said, this is all of Belgium along here, and this is what they call the Ardennes Forest. And the Ardennes Forest was a handmade forest. That means all the trees are set where they actually wanted, and they got roads and everything and towns throughout the whole thing. So this is Luxembourg. About a third of the area of Luxembourg was in the Battle of the Bulge. And this is Germany on this side over here. And this was the front line where the Germans and the Americans were fighting back and forth. We have pushed them back to this point. But then Hitler wanted Colonel Piper, who was the head of an armored column, he wanted them to go back here and go up to Antwerp and capture Antwerp. Now Antwerp we previously captured, and that was, ma'am, Antwerp is a seaport that we captured, and we could bring all our supplies and everything, and then carry them on from there. And we were hauling it all the way across France and Belgium here to get it up to the front line. So I want to say that they pushed us back. The Germans had 240,000 men. That was against our 60,000. Now this was 60 miles here. That was the front line, and 1,000 per mile is what they had, which is quite a slim amount to be working with. And so the 240, you had 4 to every one of the American boys. There was 4 against them. So that's the reason why they pushed them back 50 miles in 10 days. Now, that was 50 miles. We were pushing them back from Omaha Beach at the rate of 25 per month. So you see what happened. They had a quantity of people. Now, just while we're on that, I will say that they had 240,000, okay, and we only had 60,000 plus a few here. But actually at the end, Eisenhower got more supplies and more people to the Germans, and we ended up with 600 GIs and against their 500. And that was the way that things went. Now, here was the Bog Nest where the massacre was. And that was another thing that the Germans did. They had that massacre. They went into the tavern there, and they had changed the signs and everything. And all the armored guys, not the armor, but the artillery. There was a group that was lost because they changed the signs and everything, and they knew the area, but we don't. So anyway, they went in this tavern and they captured them, and they took them around the side of the building, and then one of the fellows took out his pistol and started shooting, and then they opened up a machine gun on them. So 84 of them got killed, and about 65 or more got away. And they would walk around in between these people, GIs, and they'd kick them to see if they moved, and if they moved, they shot them again. So they were determined to kill all they could. Well, now that particular thing is against the Geneva Convention. That's plain murder. And consequently, what happened, and the articles that you read will tell you that that was one of the down parts that the Germans did, because I remember the night when that came out, I was just in Normandy, just pulled in, and we heard that, everybody was saying, well, we're going to shoot everything we see, we're not going to give up, because if you give up, they're going to kill you. And that's what worked against them. Now, in this area, both the Germans lost 800 tanks and the Americans lost 800 tanks. And this is Bastogne, where the 101st, I believe, was the 101st was surrounded with the Germans, and they wanted to surrender. And they rode them nuts. That's what the general did, the officer in charge, rode them nuts. And they didn't know what that meant. So then finally they come back again and they told them that's means go to hell. So that's where that ended up. And then Patton was notified by Eisenhower to come and get relief here and get supplies and everything, and ammo and food. So he was there, he drove all night with his lights on, and that's something you don't do in combat because you're a dead giveaway. But since the Germans never had any air supremacy, they could get away with it. And the next morning, he was down here with supplies and everything, and he got those fellows out. I'm going to turn this over to Millie, because my legs are getting bad.
Thank you, Harold. You'll have to bear with me. I just recently lost part of my vision, so if I get a little frustrated tonight, you'll understand. 1919, 90 years ago, that's when I was born. Just 7 months after World War I, the war that was supposed to end all war. We were a very young country then compared to other countries. We were just 143 years old, but we were growing fast. Many of the intellectuals from other countries came over here to escape what was going on over in Europe. A lot of the movie moguls from Europe settled in Los Angeles, and they're responsible for making Hollywood what it was over the past. But now, like now, we were flooded, not like now, we were flooded with illegals. People had to undergo rigorous exams to get in. They had to have no contagious diseases, learn the language and the Constitution. So from 1919 to 1929, we were fast becoming a sovereign nation. Women were treated differently in those days. There were no women lawyers, no women politicians, no women doctors. The only kind of jobs that were really good for a woman was a teacher, a nurse, a beauty operator, a telephone operator. And once you were married, you were expected to quit your job or to get fired. A woman's place was in the home. And our dress was altogether different then. Could never be seen dressed like I am now. You had to wear dresses or blouses and skirts. We had silk stockings, not nylons, with a seam up the back. And you had to wear a slip so the sun didn't show your legs with your dress, through your dress. The last thing a woman would say when she left the house was, "Are my seams straight? Does my slip show?" But like now, the stock market collapsed, banks closed, businesses closed down, folks lost their jobs, couldn't pay the rent, became homeless. We were in the Great Depression. There was no government help then, no welfare. Folks depended on relatives, friends, and churches for food, clothing, and even shelter. Some built shelters along the Mississippi River bank in Midtown St. Louis, made of pieces of tin, old linoleum, and even cardboard boxes, anything to keep off the weather. This was called Hooverville, named after the president whom we blame for the Depression. Men sold apples and pencils on street corners to help feed their families. Some men hopped freight cars and went from city to city looking for work. These men were called hobos. Now there's a difference between a hobo and a bum. A bum is too lazy to work, and a hobo would do anything for some kind of work to feed his family. My father was a railroad worker. We depended on the railroad for everything. It was our main mode of transportation for all supplies and going from coast to coast. There were no big semi-tanks or trucks, no buses. We had trolley cars. They called them streetcars then. And if you lived near a railroad tracks, you would be visited by one of these hobos looking for a bite to eat, maybe for a meat or some kind of a job. We couldn't understand why we were visited by these hobos so often. If you live anywhere near a railroad track, and we lived about 10 blocks away, you were visited by one of these men, and we couldn't understand why we were visited so often. Until we found out one day after my mother had fixed something to eat, they walked out and put a chalk mark on the curbstone for the next hobo come along, knew that he could get a bite to eat there. My mother would always feed them, even if it was bread fried in bacon grease. President FDR was elected in 1932 and promised us a new deal. One was called the WPA, or Workers' Progress Administration, and began to put men to work building roads, bridges, dams, and also repeated the anti-liquor law, and breweries opened up and we began to sell beer. It looked like the old song said, "Happy days are here again." But in the meantime, there were rumors of a little corporal named Hitler from World War I stirring up trouble in Germany. He was very angry that the Germans had lost the war and that his country had been divided up, and he was determined to get it all back. But we could not be concerned. We were just getting able to live again, and we were surrounded by these two big oceans. So life for this teenager went on blissfully. We had no TV to bring all the bad news like we have now, and I was more interested in the latest song on the radio than I was in the news. I met a young man I was later to marry in the early part of 1939. I did not notice my father had his ear to the radio more than usual. And Ed, my fiance's grandfather from Germany, would sit in his broken English and say, "Those damn Germans." Those damn Germans. Then, September the 1st, 1939, Hitler bombed Poland and France and England declared war on Germany. The president said we were to remain neutral, but we had to sacrifice to help our allies. Everything was shipped overseas, so there was a shortage of everything that we took for granted. Flour, sugar, butter, eggs, milk, bread, shoes. If the shoes got too small for the children, we cut the toes out of them. Ration books. That's my original ration book you have here. Each ration book had stamps in it, and even if you had the money, you had to have one of those stamps to buy certain items. Now, all the men, FDR had built new shipyards and airplane factories. Now, all the men and single women were working. But December the 7th, 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and World War II started. Young men were drafted and older men volunteered. Now, who was going to work on all those factories and the shipyards and everything? And the call went out for the women. Hey, these pampered women, these women who had gone from being taken care of by their fathers to being taken care of by their husbands, they couldn't possibly do a man's job. But the slogan, "We can do it," went out. And these women went out and they took over every possible job a man could do. I have a lot of them on display here showing the various things that they did. There's also a slogan, if you can use a mixer in the kitchen, you can use a drill. And also, as far as our clothes and everything, there was also a little saying that, use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without. But anyway, in 1939, my husband and I, 1940, my fiancé and I had planned on getting married October of 1941. And we did, the president said we weren't going to go to war, so we went ahead and got married. And a year later, in December of 42, we had a baby boy. 3 months later, they took my husband. And I was determined that by his letters, he was so lonesome, I was determined that I was going to be with him as long as he was in the States. So when he called one day, he said, if you really mean it, he says, why don't you try it for a weekend? I'm not going to tell a complete story, don't worry. No, I can't.
How's it going?
Okay, but anyway, my husband says, come on down. He said, there's a little town right outside of my camp, and I'll be able to come in. So he got me a room in the hotel right next to the railroad tracks, so I wouldn't have to walk very far. I wasn't in there 5 minutes. I thanked God and locked the door when I heard knock, knock, knock. How much, lady? My poor husband had put me in a house of ill repute. You could rest assured, when he got there, he took me out of there in a hurry.
What town was that?
After this, he had a couple of weeks later, he called me, he said, I have a place for you in Greenwood, Mississippi. I won't be able to come in except on weekends. He got me a room in a boarding house owned by a lady named Mrs. Roberts, a dyed-in-the-wool Southern lady. She said to me, she called me Miss Knize. Miss Knize, those damn Yankees, they're ruining my town. And all the soldiers in her town. I said, Mrs. Roberts, I'm a Yankee. says, no, you're not, Miss Knize. You're from Missouri. You know, when we go to the schools, I ask these children, why did she say I wasn't a Yankee? Because I was from Missouri. These children don't even know that Missouri was divided during the Civil War. Well, she didn't like me washing my baby's diapers in her bathtub with a little washboard. She asked me to find another place. Housing was at a premium. Everything was converted into housing. Storefronts, garages, old warehouses. I found an apartment upstairs in an old warehouse. I set the baby's crib up, and that night I turned the light out and I was just about ready to go to sleep. When I heard the baby was crying, a funny cry, and I woke up and I was horrified. First of all, I'll tell you, when I walked in, I found tin cans under the length of the bed, but I didn't pay any attention to it. I was horrified. The baby and his crib were covered with red roaches. Now you know why those tin cans were there. They had kerosene to keep the roaches from crawling up the bed. You can rest assured I sat up all night long with the light lit, holding the baby in my arms. The next day, I went to the USO, and the lady told me how to get rid of it. She said, is your baby crawling? And I said, no. She says, take the sodium chloride, deadly poison, and put it all around the baseboard, and you won't have any roaches. I did, but she said, lady, for God's sake, keep everything covered, because if they walk on that or walk on your food and you eat it, you're dead. So I was that determined that I was going to be with my husband. Well, he could only come in on weekends. Then he went on maneuvers. I went home, and about a couple weeks later he called up and he said, I have a place for you in Columbia, South Carolina. By that time I'm a seasoned traveler. We stopped in front of this big antebellum home with this big porch around it, and I said, gee, that's great. I could sit there with my baby. She takes me through the house, out the back door. There's a two-story building with other servicemen's wives who wave at me as we go by. Past a big coal pile. Way in the back is a little bitty shack that she used to wash clothes. But she had added a bathtub, and I could still wash my baby's diapers and my husband's summer uniform. My husband would come in, we were right near camp, and he would come in almost every night. And when he did that, he would bring 4 or 5 of his buddies. You see their picture here. There's that little cap you see there. I cut that down for my baby. You'll see a picture of that baby. I just buried him just two years ago. And there's my husband with his buddies playing with the baby. They would bring food from the PX that I couldn't afford to buy. And I would listen to their army gripes and their jokes and look at their family pictures. And I felt like a sister to them. And I was so happy that I could bring a little home away from home to these boys. And I told these veterans not too long ago, when I walk into a meeting hall, that's the same feeling I get as I did with those boys there during the war. But the time came when my husband says, honey, I'm shipping out. You're going to have to go home. My blood turned ice. What was I going to do? 23 years old, never been away from home before with this baby. Before dawn, he gets up and he walks past the coal pile by the 2-story building. He turned and he waved. He said he carried a picture of me holding the baby in my arms all through the war. The next day I was horrified to find out that they held up his pay because he was shipping out. I was crying as I was hanging up the diapers, and the other soldiers' wives asked me what was wrong. They took up a collection, they helped me pack, and they put me on the train. I went to live in Port Arthur, Texas with my in-laws, where I got a job as a waitress at a lunchtime. Now at that time, the news of a casualty was delivered by Western Union, and in a small town by Western Union boy on a bicycle. One day as I was getting off of the bus, 3 blocks from home, I spotted that dreaded Western Union boy going down the street and watched horrified as he stopped at our door and walked up the steps. I ran into the house crying, give it to me, Mother. She says, give you what, honey? Give me that telegram. Something's happened to Ed. She said, oh no, honey. She said, my daughter's coming to visit. We held on to one another and cried. That's the kind of stress and strain that we lived under in those times. And people, that's the kind of stress and strain families are living under right now with their loved ones over in Afghanistan and Iraq. When we go to these schools, I tell these children, please honor that red, white, and blue banner that flies half-mast over the national cemeteries and covers the dead veteran's casket as it did my husband's 10 years ago. It stands for freedom and liberty that was bought at a very, very great price by men that like you see here and others like them. And I told the kids the other day, when I looked at these young people, I says, we're leaving America in your hands. For God's sake, kids, take care of it. Thank you. Done.
I'm agreed, I don't need a bike.
That's the truth.
Becky understands that. She's my dear cousin. My name is Don Green. I was a combat infantryman in the Army. That's what all the garbage is about. I first started out, I was an ass ass. That's not a dirty word. I was in high school, I took an examination, and I qualified to the Army Specialized Training course. Go to college while you're in the Army. When you get out, they make you an officer, and they give you a cushion job. I was drafted right out of high school, bang, they discontinued the program. I go to Texas, and the first thing you do at Camp Fannin, Texas, which is an infantry school, is I took some more exams. And I qualified to be a cryptologist. Now that's not a dirty word. Cryptology is code word. I couldn't pass more than 15 words of telegraphy a minute, so I washed out there, and I wound up with the 106th Infantry Division, the most infamous division in the history of the United States Army. Within a matter of 72 hours, at the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge, where's your stick? They were overrun, surrounded, captured, and they had 7,700 casualties in 72 hours. They ceased to exist as a division. Now the regiment that I was in was on the southern half, and the other part we were strung out along here. In some of our areas we were 2,000 or 3,000 yards apart from the next GI. But that's where we were. The Bulge started on the 16th day of December, and I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you about we were fighting two enemies that day. We were fighting one, the Germans, two, the weather. How adverse was the weather? We'll get to that in a minute. And this gentleman will hear, he'll stand up and tell you how bad it was. We picked this battle, and we were defending in front of Saint Vite and in front of Bastogne. The 28th Division was here, the 106th was here, the 99s were there, and the 2nd was up there. On that front, in that area, there were 4 infantry divisions and parts of 3 armored divisions at the beginning of the Bulge. And as Harold told you, the odds were 4 to 1 against us. When the battle was over, in this same area, the United States had put in 34 infantry divisions and 6 full armored divisions. And we stopped. The primary goal was to get across the Meuse River, and 1 German tank got within sight of the Meuse River. And the British unit put it out of action, and that's the closest they got to British. Hitler wanted to cross that, split the people in half, and to make his own peace terms. Up to Lynn, everything was unconditional, and after the Battle of the Bulge, it stayed unconditional. Now, I was in front of Bastogne and Saint Vite, and we were here in a little town called Berg-Royal. And we lasted a day and a half, 2 days, then we pulled back. Now, we were fighting a retreating action. What was left of my regiment, along with the 112s out of the 28th Division, we were teamed up together and fighting a delaying action back in front of Bastogne. Now, this was before the 101st Airborne got there. I had a cousin named Ray Kehoe, who was in the 101s. And after all the family reunions, I used to tease him about the fact that, hey, we weren't Gastonia, we weren't surrounded, not until you fools got there. But they brought the 101s in. What they had done, they had been up the market garden at the 82nd, and they had just got chewed to pieces, they were reorganized. So they brought them in here. When they brought them in, they pulled us back, and we stayed with the 112s, what was left of them, and we worked along what they called Skyline Drive. It was the best blacktop road in the area. And we patrolled it. And then all of a sudden he said, "God, we better pull in our horns," and we farmed a perimeter defense 1.5 miles out from St. Beat, at St. Victor St. Beat. Now we held that, remember as you're thinking about this battle, everybody's aware of what the 101st did at Pasco. And what also occurred was up here at St. Beat. And we held that position, in that road position, for 5.5, almost 6 days. There's 3 key points in this battle: Bastogne, St. Beat, and the Elsenborn Ridge. And this gentleman was at Elsenborn. There was an awful lot of people went up Elsenborn Ridge who never came down. The Elsenborn Ridge was the highest point in Belgium, and it was a key factor on Mr. Pfeiffer's armored divisions to break loose. Now, if they'd been able to get across the Neuse River here, then they would have been on a flat, open plains, and they could put in their famous German blitzkrieg, and probably made Antwerp. But it was touch and go. And a lot of people laugh when I tell them this, but it's a matter of great history in the annals of American history. It was such a touchy situation. And I like to tell the kids at schools, and I'll tell you, the battlefield was fluid. What does fluid mean in military term? Nobody knows what's going on, or nobody knows where anybody is. That's fluid battlefield. But Roosevelt had called Oppenheimer, the developer of the atomic bomb, and asked him, because of the seriousness of this situation, if the bomb was ready. Well, of course it wasn't. So that's how close it comes to using it on the Germans. Well, we managed to hold our own. And as Harold alluded to, Patton mustered up his troops and started coming up to relieve Bastogne. The British brought 1 full corps down from the north, and the 9th filled in the voids there, and they start filtering and bringing in full infantry divisions to shore up the fade there. Now, I alluded temporarily to the weather, and the worst thing we had was the weather was cold. And as I said that one day, my son was in the audience and said, "How cold was it, Dad?" There was a time there in this battle which lasted 34 days. We had 22 consecutive days the temperature was sub-zero. Now in school you tell these youngsters that means it never got above 0. And the people had to watch themselves, they had to be careful, you had to take care of your friend, your fellow companion. Because if you were injured or wounded and you weren't evacuated in 2, 3, maybe 4 hours, because a simple fact of life occurred. You laid there and froze to death. It was that bitterly cold. Which gets the Germans too. So we managed to hold St. Beat for 6 days. And they were bringing more troops in. Then we finally had to give up. In the meantime, Eisenhower split in half and given the south half to Bradley and the north half to Montgomery. Now, the only thing Montgomery ever did in World War II was say, we're going to pull out of St. Vincent, we're going to tidy up the battlefield. I agreed with him wholeheartedly. We had managed between the 2nd Division and 99th and the 7th Armored and the 106th, and there was somewhat of the 4th Regiment in there. We managed to hold a 1.5 mile wide corridor from St. Beat back to Beaufort. And we were in that area. So he said, "I want to evacuate, I want you to pull back and set up a perimeter defense to pull back here and this way." He said, "I don't want another unit encircled and trapped." Now that's how hairy the situation. Then we pulled back. Now I alluded to how cold it was. About Thanksgiving that year, it started raining, and from that time on, we had rain, sleet, snow, freezing rain, ice, any adverse weather conditions you could think of, we had it. And it was miserable. You couldn't get dry. If you managed to get dry, where are you going to get dry clothes? Steal them off a pole. Excuse me, moonlight requisition. But that was the point that we tried to make, is the cold weather and the adverse conditions. Yeah, I'll get to that. So we're struggling with it. We're fighting nothing in the world but a temporary delaying action. We try to hold a position, then we pull back. We try to hold a position, then we pull back. Finally, they start getting enough reserves in the other divisions in Armorton that we just all of a sudden stop. And why did we keep on that and not just give up and run? Because he alluded to the fact that there was Malmedy. And Malmedy was the area where they shot all America. You know, they put their hands up, boom, they shoot you. And we looked at each other and said, what the hell's the difference? They're going to shoot us anyway. And it stiffened the resolve of the average GI. Now, it wasn't any big generals that won this battle. It wasn't any big heroes. It was a common infantryman, a tanker, artillery. The guy down there in the mud, grubbing to stay alive. That's who won this battle. How horrendous was the battle? There were 17 Congressional Medals of Honor issued in 34 days in this battle. All but 4 of them were posthumous. Now, and some of those are posthumous, they're up there on the Elson board, some at Town Beach, some at Stowe. We pulled back, and we got back beyond Versland and back to Maristad. And we finally got our group together. Now, we had been called, dirty word in the military term, stragglers. We were separated from our unit. But actually, that's what everybody was. You'd go to a position manned by a group, be 5 or 6 different outfits all together in one position. Anyway, they started to get us reformed into my regiment, my company, my platoon. And the first thing they did, I walked in, they said, you go over and sit down. I said, oh, well, I'll go sit down. And pretty soon here comes the doctor along and says, take off your shoes, Ben. And they tell you, big thing in the Army, keep your feet dry, put on dry socks. That's a great thing. Where are you going to get dry socks? Somebody came up with the idea, and I don't know who it was, but God love him. You sit down, you take your shoes off, wring them out as dry as you can get them, then you pull your long handle underwear in, and you stick it down next to your skin, and by next morning you're fairly dry. You got a fairly dry pair of socks, and what do you do with them? You put them on your fairly dry feet, and you stick them back in your leather boots that are still wet. So it was kind of a losing battle. At that particular time, well, I missed it, one point to everybody else. Well, we had such adverse, let me back up, I'll tell you about the feet in a minute. Back up about the forest that we were in. It's a man-made forest. And the pine trees were 50, 60 feet high. I know, but I'm cherishing that. He was up in the lady clean out her house the other day, and he found some from 1939 or 40. But anyway, here's these huge trees. And we knew before daylight that we were going to have clear weather. How do we know that? You listened and all you could hear was the drone of aircraft, the drone of aircraft engines. There were so many of them, you could almost walk from wing to wing. And an elite aircraft was throwing out tinsel, like we used to put on the trees when we were kids. You can buy it now at Walgreens, but it's plastic. He found something the other day that was metallic. One of our auxiliary ladies found some that was still metal, and it was imported from Germany. So I think they swept up all the tinfoil. But here, this day before Christmas Eve, that you see the story about Pat asked the chaplain to give him a prayer about good weather. Boy, he must have known somebody. The weather turned beautiful. You couldn't buy a cloud. The closest cloud was, I think, over Detroit. And the weather was absolutely crystal clear. Cold. And here's all these huge giant Christmas trees, or balsam pines. And the timbers were planted to shore up the mines that Viviers and Liège built. And here's the pathfinders dumping all this tinfoil out to give false echoes to the radar. So they couldn't shoot the planes out. There was so many, they just shot in the air anyway. But you can imagine all of this brilliant sunlight and all this ice and snow and all this tinfoil draped over the trees, laying on the ground. And we were standing out there in absolute awe. It was a gorgeous pastoral scene until some idiot tried to shoot me. Then the war started over again. But that's always something the lady cleaned out her garage and he found some of the original tinfoil. I get that little top at my own church here a couple of years ago. And afterwards the lady came up to me and she said, Don, my mother in her lifetime had one job. She said she worked for a company on North Grand that took the sheets of tinfoil and split them to make the confetti for the aircraft. So I've never heard anybody say that before. But let's get back to the doctor looking at me. And he looked at me and he says, boy, you got a problem, boy. And I said, okay. He says, get in the ambulance. He goes to the next guy, he says, you're all right. So they were separating out the people with problem with their feet. Back then they had a dirty word for it. They called it trench foot. And they court-martialed you for getting trench foot. But I swear to God, this is true. Until they found out they had 35 or 40,000 trench foot cases from the Battle of the Bulge. Then they called it frostbite or frozen feet bilateral, whatever. He took a look at me and he said, you're out. So I was evacuated on New Year's Eve. I went back to Paris. There were so many casualties coming out of this water that they turned the first general hospital in Paris into an evacuation hospital. And they were shipping all the wounded to directly to England for the hospitals. I got to England, I'm laying in bed, and all the leg wounds, anybody wounded below the waist, they had little tents they put over to keep the bed clothing from rubbing and irritating. And when they did that, they came in one day, and I wish I would have written the man's name down, God love him. He peels the sheet back real gently over that cage and looks at it and says, And I said, what do you mean by He says, you got a problem. I said, yeah, what? He said, we're going to have to amputate your left foot. And I looked at him and I said to him the typical GI answer, you and whose army? And so we got to arguing about it. He said, well, I said, what do you mean? Well, he said, you have little black and green streaks in your foot. I said, so? He said, well, that's gangrene starting to develop. He said, if we don't make cut, he said, we'll take it off just by the ankle, you won't be too bothered. I said, no. He said, well, I'll make a deal with you. He said, I'll try to treat you with massive penicillin. He said, if that doesn't work, son, he said, it comes off at the knee. So, it worked. But I don't remember his name. Now, everybody we go, every place we go, I always ask two questions. Anybody in here have military service? Raise your hand. Yeah. You do. How many of you have taken the time to make a record of your military service? Write it down. Put it on video. Put it on tape. Your kids may not care, but your grandchildren do. How do I know that? I'm sitting at home. And I get a telephone call from my stepdaughter lives in Sykesville, Missouri, and her son says, Grandpa, Mom says you were in the Battle of the Bulge. I said, yeah, but. He said, well, I'm doing a history report on that. He says, I'm supposed to interview you. So he starts asking me questions. And so I told him, whoa. I said, put your mother on the phone. And I said, Kay, honey, you're going to have a phone bill you'll never pay. And so they came up the next weekend. I spent 2 days talking to him. And about a month later, I get a phone call. It says, Grandpa, I got an A on my paper. And I heard Kay in the background says, you tell him you both got an A. Now, I was evacuated Christmas Eve. Same humility of having an amputation. But what I like to remember about this battle is the second question people always ask me, my cousin Charlie or my grandfather or my uncle or my father was in the Battle of the Bulge. Did you know him? And, you know, surprisingly enough, sometimes you hear a name that's familiar, but generally you don't. Now, again, remember, Harold told you that near the end of the battle, there were 600,000 Americans directly involved in this battle. I mean, right there in the battle. There were 3 million plus men in Europe. And supporting the 600,000 in the battle itself was another 300 or 400,000. So almost 1/3 of everybody in Europe was supporting the fight to eliminate the Battle of the Bulge. And it was the most, what it is, and I told you about my division, we referred to ourselves as the Hungry and Sick, or the 106th. It's one of the infamous battles that lasted, what, combat 72 hours. They never reformed the division. There was no sense in it. But all of these other people that were in this battle have had the same remorse and fun. And in this battle, there were something like 40,000 MIAs, or wounded, 24,000 who were KIA, and there was something like 60 or 65,000 who were captured, overrun by the German army. So it was a horrendous battle. And in the history of the United States Army, it was the largest land battle ever fought by the American Army. The largest. And that's, but what you can say, cold weather, cold weather. Don't talk to me about standing on the car to wait for the bus when we go to school. I could go on for another hour, but Cousin Becky says no. So I'll turn this over to my friend Paul, whom I absolutely don't like. This uniform you see here, that's what he came home in 64 years ago, and what makes me mad is he can still wear it. You can't put it on with a few back. This lady, his name is
Normally I wear the wool uniform in the wintertime when I go to school classes and have the field jacket on. And I thought I'd bring this to show you. These are gas flaps. And that was, we had gussets in here. And that was so that if they use mustard gas, it wouldn't get to your skin as soon. It would cause blistering. Mustard gas off got the people's lungs. I was a replacement Baden's Third Army in the SAR area, and when I joined there, November the 20th, they said, what weapon do you want? I said, I don't know. They said, well, how about this M3 submachine gun, this 45 caliber, we call it the grease gun. And they said it was Lieutenant Hanisowski's. He threw a grenade in a German tank that blew up and killed him. I found out later in a book called A Biography of a Battalion that was written by about my battalion, said that it not only killed him, it killed 2 sergeants and wounded 2 others. Anyway, he had a grenade and I didn't realize it. I'm always slow at thinking of what the thing was. And so I had me make the reconnaissance of the bombed-out railroad bridge across the SAR River, and I got my commission in anti-aircraft artillery, and as soon as I got my commission there, they said, well, we're going to send you down to Fort Benning to become an infantry officer, platoon leader. So after 10 weeks there, or 8 weeks, special training, then I taught raw recruits for 16 weeks of their 17 weeks basic training. they didn't send us on the bivouac, because I figured that, I guess they thought we'd get cold and stuff. Anyway, I took a squad, and instead of going down the railroad tracks, I was gonna go to the road and went parallel to the river, and look at the bridge. And as soon as I got to the town, squad leader got a little jumpy. I said, "You wanna go back?" And he said, "Yeah." So I said, we turned around, and it was just like this. This was a road coming this way, and we heard some troops coming up there. I said, "Let's play dead in the ditch." We got up past there, we found out up there they were Americans. We heard talking, but we didn't dare move because we figured they'd shoot us. Later I found out it was K Company. I said, "Did you see this there?" And he said, "Yeah, we thought you were a bunch of dead Germans." And I went back to my runner, and I said, "You go with me?" He said, "Yeah, I'll go with you." So I went on the railroad tracks this time, and I got to the trestle over the road, and he says, "Lieutenant, I'm afraid of heights, so I can't cross this trestle." I says, "You wait here. If I don't come back, you tell them what happened." So then I looked there, and the first pier was knocked out, and it looked to me like you could put some boards across there. It'd be easier to walk down than to cross. When I got back, they said, "We wanted to know whether we could get tanks or trucks across." And I said to myself, "You dummies, why didn't you tell me what you wanted to find out?" So anyway, I was, fresh from the States. So then, next morning, I took Sergeant Beasley with me, and we went down the railroad tracks, and Beasley had been shot at before. I still was scared a little bit. So he went down and crossed and came on back. That afternoon, an engineer lieutenant did what Beasley did, but he had to crawl back because they were shooting at him. Then, I don't know, a day or so later, they said, "Since you made the reconnaissance of bridge, you lead the battalion in the attack." So here I was, no grenades, this was machine gun, in cover of darkness, early in the morning. And as soon as I got across the bridge, the machine gun opened up, and I hit the dirt. And then, I don't know what all happened, but we finally got into the next town. I didn't ask what happened to the machine gunner. 60-some years later, hearing other people's stories, well, a week or so later, at the Bleece River crossing, there was room for once. We were supposed to cross in the cover of darkness, and it was starting to get daylight. The boats weren't there. The company commander says, "I don't care if I get court-martialed, about face, we're going back into town." And then the boats got there, and this time I wasn't in the lead. I was the 3rd platoon. There was room for one squad of my platoon, and I stayed with the 2 squads. That afternoon, they said, "Secure the other end of town." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Put an outpost there so we can't be surprised without knowing about it." And so I stepped out the door and across the street about where that rape is. There was an orange flash. A mortar shell had gone over there and exploded. A piece hit me on the bone next to my right eye. A piece hit me in the Adam's apple, and if you go like that on your Adam's apple, that's what it felt like, and it hurts. It hurt to swallow, and I was a kid, loved to eat. That bothered me. And then I got a mortar fragment in my lower leg. This is the hole where the mortar fragment went through. I'll pass this around. That's a blood stain. And I went back to the hospital, and the nurse said, "You want to save it?" And I said, "Okay." And she cut it out of the long underwear. And this is 1/3 natural size. That's the Purple Heart I got for it. On the back side's a telegram that my parents got. And a month later, they've got a convalescent card. The first one, they said, "Your son was slightly wounded in battle." And this one, I found out somebody read it and told me, it says, "Your husband was wounded in battle." I'll pass this around. You can look at that. So, in the hospital, I had an Army hospital bathrobe. It's like Hawkeye wears on that. I bought it at war surplus, so this was my uniform during the Battle of the Bulge. Back in the hospital, I met Mickey Vicky, who was in the weapons platoon, and he asked these kids that were at the machine gun, he said, "What was your mission?" They said, "Fight to the last man." He said, "Did you know we were coming?" They said, "No, if we had, we wouldn't have been there." Well, 60 years later, I'm convinced these Polish kids that were defending Germany, seeing all these troops coming across that bridge, they weren't about to commit suicide. They had to shoot because there was a German corporal watching them, but I'm convinced now they weren't shooting at me, and that's why I'm here today. Anyway, I had this army, my neighbor across the street gave my son a pack like I wore. There's a base bayonet, carbine bayonet. Let's see, what else I got here? Here's a American Army helmet. It's got a liner in it, and we have an advantage because you could take that out and you could use the helmet as a wash basin. It was desirable to shave your face as much as you could. They couldn't do it in the Battle of the Bulge because it's too cold, but where I was, it wasn't quite freezing yet. It was much easier to bandage a face or work on a face that wasn't full of whiskers. So you tried to do that, and you could use it to bail out your foxhole. And one night, it was 10 helmets full before the water level went down. We had a real neat one with logs all around, logs across the top, and German poncho across the top. And I had a sump in there, and a canteen didn't seem to make any difference, so then it was 12 helmets full. So I had 6 inches of stuff, of brush in the bottom there, and the water was coming up almost to the edge of the top of the sticks when I found out about it. And the other use for it, if the shelling is too heavy and you got to relieve yourself, you can take the helmet liner out, use it for a toilet, throw it out, and put the helmet liner back in. Germans can't do that. We can pass this around too. This is I was an officer, but the rifleman would have a cartridge belt like that, and two bandoliers with a clip of M1, these are blanks, in each one of these pockets, and the helmet and an M1 rifle. The M1 rifle would weigh as much as this. This is about 6 inches longer than an M1 rifle. It's about the length of a DAR.
You don't take a rifles into schools anymore.
Yeah.
Give me an idea what an M1 weighs. 9.1.
Person with one canteen, M1 rifle and helmet, all that would be about 55 pounds stuff. When we stop, the thing you do is you start digging a hole. In the Battle of the Bulge, they had to have blasting dynamite or something like that through the frost line, or where a shell hit. One of the fellows said he'd always go where there was a shell hole that was hot, and it would go through the frost line and dig there. And furthermore, he said he didn't think they could hit the same spot twice. But so it's either a pick or a shovel. And as soon as we stopped, we started getting under. We had the field jacket like that, and I was at and we had a wounded cap like Radar O'Reilly wears. And one of the fellows was a prisoner of war in our group said the first thing the Germans did was to take their wounded cap because they didn't have it. We had wounded gloves with lead bombs, and some people in the rear areas had mittens with trigger finger spots in it, but they didn't have any of them in my outfit. The pants had the gas flap on it too. The socks were cushioned sole like that. This is inside out. They're part wool. I had a wool overcoat like this, and the bottom half of this was all covered with mud. And the mud in France was like the mud in Oklahoma. How many of you have ever been in Oklahoma or Georgia? The mud. In Missouri, if your ground is that color, it's not very good because it's in the clay. But down in those other Oklahoma and Georgia, that's fertile soil. I known I was going to be doing this, I'll get that mud on there, but I hadn't cleaned up. After the war in Europe was over, I had got field hoods. We were expecting to go to Japan. They also had field pants like this. We bumped them ahead, the rear arm people had, but we didn't. When I was at a program at Webster Groves High School, one fellow was battling in Italy, and he got 2 silver stars. He had 6 6 grenades. He'd have 3 in each pocket, and he threw them on the enemy. I also had the wool shirt, and I had the wool knit sweater that my mother knit, and then had an army sweater like that, and then we had the summer underwear, and I wasn't smart enough to take them off. When I put the long underwear over it, I had that underneath, and underneath the long johns, and they became Indian drawers, and they crept up on me, and I had to take the pants down and rip the crotch out about a week before I got rid of the whole thing. And we were mufflers, everything was OD colored. Towels, we had a towel like that. They had face towels they issued us. Nobody carried them. We just carried this because we needed to shave as much as we could. My brother was in Africa, and they had this on the helmet and tucked it in under the helmet liner. This is parachute cloth. That's so the helmet doesn't shine. I have a net around my helmet that I wear when I go to school. Now, this is a rummy bag with a full lining, and to get out of it, you pull this zipper up like that, and then you open up like that. But Mr. Johnson here said that his outfit wouldn't allow them because he couldn't get out of them fast enough. And on the back, when I got wounded 3 days, on the 13th of December, 3 days later, the Battle of Bulge occurred, and all the convalescent hospitals where guys like me would be back to that convalescent hospital and back to your outfit in about a week's time. I ended up in a hospital back in England and didn't get back to my outfit until it was time to cross the Rhine. This is an aid pouch, and when we started giving this, they said, "What's inside?" I said, "I don't know," and so I opened it up, and this thing had a little pack like this of sulfanilamide crystals. It looks like salt or sugar. You sprinkle that on the wound, and then you can't see it, it's about worn out, but on here it said in red, put the red side away from the wound, and this is long enough to go around any part of the body. And believe it or not, this must have been vacuum packed and it all came out of there. Then on the outside of it, we had a pack of 8 sulfanilamide tablets. It said, "Do not use unless you have plenty of water for 24 hours. It's being worn out, but showing it for 10 years to classes. Normally they bring sterilized water up to us in our canteen, but if we didn't and we needed water, we dip out of a shell hole that at least was filtered through the ground a little bit, and we fill our canteen, and then we had halazone tablets, chlorine pills to purify it. They bring food up to us in a mess kit. This is for one person, this is for another person. And they'd have breakfast around 4 o'clock in the morning, and after dark they'd bring up for supper if they could get to us. And then you had to have your own fork and spoon. I liberated the German one that didn't have the handles on it. It pivoted like that. It was made of aluminum. But whatever you had, you licked the food off of that and stuffed it in your pocket. Those went back and got sterilized.
These made you sick, those did.
They had K-rations like this. This was breakfast, and a good one was pork and egg yolks in the can, and supper, beef and apple parts was a good one. And let's see, it had meat, eat cold or after heating by boiling a can in water, or after frying in your own fat, or in a viscous. All we did was, inside this box has a wax liner, and we light the wax liner and hold the can over the fire to heat it if we want, or we'd eat it cold. Coffee, biscuits, bouillon, confection, cigarettes, sugar, and chewing gum.
Good cigarettes.
The dinner had cheese and pimento. Now, in this bags, boxes. This, it was plain old cardboard like that. These are reproductions. And the inside one was a wax impregnated box. And then there was a can, and then they had a special 4-cigarette pack that was in there to keep it from rattling in the box. And the box was that size because Cracker Jack didn't have equipment to make boxes that size. And then they had book matches like this, so you could smoke the cigarettes and heat the box to heat your vegetables. Then you had chewing gum, and I don't know whether there was a 5-pack or whether we just had one stick. When we buy chewing gum in the store, it was 5 sticks of gum for a nickel. Then the breakfast had a little pack of toilet paper, the Waldorf brand, and those days it was made by Scott Paper Company, and there were Scott's, and then there was a better, softer kind, and Waldorf was a little bit coarser. And then there was a pack of crackers. They looked like graham crackers, but they were as hard as dog biscuits. And then this pack, there was also a foil pack of instant coffee for the breakfast or supper, and then sugar cubes to eat with it. And noon was either orangeade or lemonade in a foil pack. And then the supper had a chocolate bar about the size of my 2 fingers, and breakfast had a fruit bar, and then the noon meal had caramels, and they also had a D-bar like this. It was chocolate, I think, and paraffin, but anyway, it'd take a long time. You had to gnaw it. It was supposed to be a whole meal like that. Now, when I first started out, I had 1 day's supply of K-rations, and after we were without supplies for about a week, after that, I carried 2 days supply of K-rations and a couple of D-bars. Now, the back of my helmet looked like this with a white stripe on the back. At that time, I thought that was so we didn't turn our backs to the enemy, they'd have a good aiming stake. But that was to tell who the leader was. And the command was, heads up. And you look for the guy that had this happen, you do what he did. We had foot powder. My brother had sunburn preventive preparation cream paste made by Helene Kerr's company. He was in Africa. He was in the combat engineers. We also had insect powder from insects. This was a German hand grenade. Ours was
It was similar to it, like a potato masher.
yeah. That was a concussion grenade. This is a fragmentation grenade. You pull a pin, as long as you hold your hand on there, nothing happens. As soon as you let go, this thing will fly off, and then break into all these little pieces in about 5 seconds. If you were smart, you were smart, you'd wait 1, 2, and then throw it so they didn't have time to throw it back.
I'm sorry, we're kind of running
That's
over.
okay. You're taking your time. We don't want to miss a thing. So go ahead.
Our vice president is here, and he's a combat infantryman, and I'd like to say a few words.
After he's done, we'll have a Q&A.
Mr. Walker,
You
Jim?
want to say a few things?
I think they pretty much covered it, but I was with the 99th Division
No.
on the North Shore. That's where we were at,
Elsinborn Bridge.
on Elsinborn Ridge. We held that, and the Battle of the Bulge lasted 41 days. Held that, 26 of them were below zero. I'm a disabled veteran because I had my feet broken.
Who did?
And as a result of that, they've covered the whole front.
Well, we did a good job then.
Right?
We did good.
Yeah.
Fine.
this with chicken feathers in it. They called it a down bag. Monsanto had a way of making chicken feathers. They chop them up and then they would treat them chemically to fluff up like down. They call them cheap chopped chicken feathers, but I understand that those chicken feathers would stick through the liner inside and it was kind of not so comfortable. I just learned that a week ago.
We've been put together these teams, which is 3 veterans and a wife of a veteran. And since 1995, we've gone to schools 388 times. Yeah, on a continuing basis.
We've been to the brewery too. We went to the brewery too. Or Legion Post. They're Legion Post advisors.
But that's, our primary purpose of going to schools is to perpetuate the memories of the sacrifices that these fellows went through. And we got a bookwork that we pass out to the kids. Yeah. And that bookwork has a present day picture and a wartime picture.
Okay.
The purpose of the 2 pictures is that many of these fellows don't look like they looked during the war.
Really?
Change.
My dear beloved cousin said we have time for Q&As, and we'll try to answer if you have any questions.
I don't know if I hear what it's telling, but how did it get the name bulge?
I'm glad you asked. What does that look like? Oh, wait a minute, no, I'm very serious. That looks like a bulge. Winston Churchill came up with the name, and he said, "Ooh, there's a bulge in the line." So if you look at the line, see the way it is? It looks like the bulge.
Belgians, they go for the Ardennes.
They call it the Battle of the Ardennes. But Winston Churchill came up with the title Bulge, the Battle of the Bulge. And the Americans picked it up.
And one more point though, the 41 days it took to restore the original line.
Yeah. It took us, as he was saying, it took us 41 days to restore, go back to the original line. And
How
then
many days was it that Rudy said that he went without having a bath, without changing clothes?
Well, who did?
How many
30
days?
days.
At least a month.
Well,
A
months.
month.
Yeah.
About a month.
Everybody stinks with the way.
Everybody smelled bad, so, I mean,
It sounds like a story now, but imagine these are only 18, 19, 20-year-old boys.
All that time, there was no R&R.
no.
You fought constantly the whole
We
month.
never, once it started, we never
No
let up.
going back or nothing else.
You had a question, this lady here was first.
What month were you born, Millie? Was it Millie?
June.
June. She's,
June,
my dad was born in
This
January
month.
19th.
In fact, June the 14th, my
Oh.
daughter gave me a big 90th birthday.
Wow. Absolutely. Where was the 92nd Division?
99.
No, he was in the Black Forest, near the Black Forest. When it was over, he was in Hitler's Eagle's Nest and.
Well, he was down probably the 7th Army. The 92s,
222?
the 92s were that far south.
Oh, okay.
This gentleman
I'm
had,
just wondering about your ammo supply. Did you ever get close to running out of it to keep you pretty well supplied with ammo?
generally, yeah, they came up with a kitchen truck or they run specials, or they say, hey, put the Jeep and go get some ammunition. The first 2 regiments of my division were wiped out, annihilated. They were out of food, they were out of water, they were out of ammunition, they were out of medical supplies, and there was no way in the world they could do anything. But after the war, a German general was interviewed and said they may have been overrun and they may have been captured and had to surrender. Now remember, that was 72 hours. Now here's 2 full combat regiments that are behind the German front line, and they're worried to death about what that bunch is going to do. You know, here's an armed group behind your lines. You know they're there. But they did know they were out of food, ammunition, and water. But some of them broke away and got clean, and a lot of them were POWs and and quite a few of them didn't survive the POW camps.
My husband was a forward observer, this town was to go up and start with the infantry and go to the highest point, like a church steeple or a high hill. The average life of a forward observer was 3 minutes. 12 forward observers in his outfit. He was the only one that came out without being
Anybody else have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Have any of you ever gone back
Yes,
to
ma'am.
see where you were
Yes,
during the war?
yes.
I've been back twice, and last time was the Battle of the Bulge tour, which we went back to where we were at here, and I may say that what they're doing, they're keeping, the Belgian people are keeping those foxholes that the infantry people were in, they're keeping those in remembrance, and so people know what they had to do.
Yeah, I have personally been back to that area 4 times. I was back in Europe 11 times. Of course, I had to go back to the home, man. So we've been back before. Anybody else have a question?
Well, I was going to say, will you tell us please about what you're doing these days?
What I'm doing, absolutely nothing.
No. Shine's got to hear it.
Well, after the military, after I get, well, this is the story I think you remember Big R, my daddy. I got home, I'm the last one of the family to come home because I'm the youngest. And I'm sitting at the breakfast table one morning, and the big gentle giant looks at me and says, well, he says, you've been home a week. He says, what do you think you're going to be doing? And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I said, that 5220 looks real good to me. And he said, what's the 5220? I said, well, the government will pay me $20 a week for 52 weeks so I can adjust to civilian life. And he looked at me and said, that's really nice. And Uncle Ira said to me, he said, where are you going to live? Get a job. That was my adjustment. So I was tooling around, and I came home as a disabled veteran. And the DAV said they were holding this one back in the back, spent a year in the hospital after the war. The DAV said, hey, they're holding, you can open up any civil service exam as a disabled veteran with non-competition, no competitive test. All I gotta do is pass it. So, in the meantime, I was working part-time at the post office, where they were hired, just working about 2 nights a week, enough for car fare and beer money. And so, we went down to DAV, we took the examination, and I entered the Postal Service. And I spent 42 years in the Postal Service with my military time. And I retired as a director of safety for the St. Louis postal area in the St. Louis area. So that's what I did. Harold, what did you do?
I had 1 week off. That's all my 20 was, 1 week. And, well, I had an apprenticeship for tool die maker, and I wanted to go back and get to the end and get the bigger money, so. And I worked at the company for 42 years, and ended up being a sales engineer, and traveled the whole United States. So,
What was the company? What was the name of the company?
General Metal Products, and they were bought out right before I retired. I've been retired since I've been 61.
59.
And it's been lovely. I've been talking, what do we do?
Yeah.
Well, for 18 years, I worked
I
there,
don't know what you did.
donated my time to Habitat. I built how many houses around North St. Louis. And then I did the county older resident program. I was called the year. We did put locks on doors and everything. I learned how to do that, and after a want to armrest or rails on stair steps going down. Boy, I sure gotta look at some homes. Not good homes, I mean rattles. But we did that for about 10 years, and then I started with Habitat, 22 years. My neighbor and I, we'd go up there and work and all through the winter.
Paul?
I was at Washington University and studying engineering, and we went 3 semesters a year, so I got 4 years of schooling in 3 years from September to September, and it was in the advanced door ROTC. So when I got out, I had my degree. I got out in May. I didn't have enough points after the war in Japan was over, so I had to stay teaching infantry tactics to more people in Camp, who were Fort Campbell. It was Camp Campbell, Kentucky. When I got out in May, then I finally got a job on the 30th of September at Monsanto, and as a designer, drafting, and then I got bored the 3rd year. I stood up so I wouldn't fall asleep, and I fell asleep standing up, and then I finally got into the group that was all chemical engineers. I graduated mechanical engineer, and then I started taking the chemical engineering courses for night school, and I was for 3 years doing shift work, startup apartments, and I got into instrumentation, and I was having so much fun. Before I was married, I had 2 weeks vacation, and I didn't take but 1 week. And then I stayed until I was 69, and they finally had me doing projects at the end that I didn't like when I started there, dismantling tanks, asbestos piping, insulation on piping and stuff like that. So I really had fun.
There's one thing we failed to mention in this presentation, and Millie would love to tell you about what her husband did.
My husband came home on a 30-day furlough after World War, after the year of World War, because he was expected to go to Japan because it was starting to form with observers. I met him in Jefferson Parish. By that time, the little boy was about 2.5 years old, and I had been taking pictures showing his pictures of his father in uniform, his daddy's a soldier. So when this little boy saw this man in uniform, he looked up at him and he said, "My daddy's a soldier too." And my husband picked him up and says, "I'm your daddy's son." And my son says, "I want a Coke." My husband took that baby and walked left everybody else and went to look he had. But it was a terrible, after the war was over with, he was never the same.
Tell me about Pokemon.
Oh, he also was one of the first ones to enter Buchenwald concentration camp. And he wrote me an 8-page letter describing it explicitly the day after he was there. My daughter knew the rabbi who was in charge of building the new Jewish museum, Holocaust museum here in St. Louis. And when he heard about the letter, and my husband, they interviewed my husband. And if you happen to go to the Holocaust museum and see that movie, you might see a man describing what he saw. And as he's talking, the tears are rolling down his cheek, and his chin is quivering. It was so horrible. And when he used to scream at nighttime, wake up screaming, and sometimes he'd knock me out of bed. And it took him, I guess, 15 or 20 years to really get over the war. He was never the same as he had seen.
Anybody else have any questions?
Tell us about the statue you're